Hello and welcome back to the channel, everybody. Today we're going to be going over the top 10 melee weapons in Fallout New Vegas, at least in my opinion. This is going to be covering both the edged weapons and the blunt weapons. These aren't in any particular order because some of them get better or worse as the game goes on, but this is going to be like in a rough order of them, just like the rest of these top 10 lists. So coming in at number 10, we have Old Glory. Old Glory is technically the unique pool cue, which is weird because it's actually really good, and pool cues are usually really terrible. This one you get at the very end of Lonesome Road. This is one of Ulysses' signature weapons. He has this plus his 12.7mm SMG, and this one is pretty strong. It doesn't have that higher requirements for a melee weapon, high strength requirement, but if you're going melee, you're probably going to have that anyway. It does high damage per hit, very high damage per second. It has an above average crit modifier, which is great. It has very high crit damage. It also has pretty low action point cost, and it doesn't weigh that much, and it has decent item health. So it can do pretty good damage. Since this is technically a pool cue, it's very easy to repair too, because pool cues are not hard at all to find, and that's usually what pool cues are used for, is just repair fodder. The only downside to this weapon is that you do have to go through all of the Lonesome Road. So that means you're going to have to beat Ulysses one way or the other, and then you can get this at the very end of it. And the Lonesome Road is generally considered like the most difficult DLC. You can do it a little bit early and have a little bit of an easier time with it, but it's still going to be fairly rough, because the Tunnelers, the Deathclaws, and the Marked Men are all really strong enemies regardless of what level you are. Coming in at our number 9 spot, we have the Protonic Inverse Axe from Old World Blues. You can actually find a couple of these. I believe there's 2 or 3 of them that you can find throughout the game. This one is the Purple Axe, and this one functions very similar to the Fire Axe, but it's just a little bit stronger than a regular Fire Axe. This one doesn't have too high of stat requirements to use. It does do really high damage per hit, really high damage per second. It has an average crit modifier with pretty decent crit damage to it. It doesn't cost too much action points to use, so it's pretty good in a VATS build. It doesn't weigh too much, and it has good item health. It also has a unique effect of dealing extra damage towards robots and power armor. So you just get a bonus whenever fighting those enemies. And aside from that, this has a very similar stat line to like the Fire Axe, which is already a really good weapon. An advantage to this weapon though is that you can repair it with the regular Proton axes, and you can also repair it with the throwing axes, which can be really good just for carrying those around in the early game, assuming you don't have jury rigging or you can't get jury rigging for a little while. This also has a good VATS attack too. All around, this is just a fantastic weapon, and if you want to run to Old World Blues early, this is a really good weapon for a melee build, because you can get this or just the regular axes without too much trouble, and they are very, very similar to the Fire Axe, which I would consider a pretty like high-end melee weapon, especially at the start of the game. So be on the lookout for these, they are really good. At number 8, we have Gehenna. Gehenna is the unique shish kebab, and this one you do have to buy from the gunrunners. Weirdly enough, you think it would be with one of the other vendors, but it's not. It doesn't have too high a stat requirements to use. It does pretty good damage per hit, very good damage per second because it attacks so fast. Has a 2x crit modifier, but below average crit damage, weirdly enough. This one is really strong with the Pyromaniac perk, and this is probably one of the best weapons to use with that perk, because that's another 50% increase, so the damage jumps up pretty high with this one. This one doesn't weigh very much, only coming in at 3, and it has very, very high item health. It takes a long time for this weapon to break. It's all around just a really solid weapon, and if you want to go with a dedicated fire build or a fire melee build, which is probably one of the better builds to use with the fire weapons besides maybe like unarmed, although a lot of the time if you're doing melee and unarmed, you're doing both of them. So this is a really good option. Assuming you have the caps to get it, you can kind of just grab it whenever you want if you just go to the Vendatron and have enough money for it. Coming in at number 7, we have a tie between the Blade of the West and the Blade of the East. I put both of these here because they're pretty interchangeable. The Blade of the East can only be obtained at the very end of the game, and you do have to side against Caesar's Legion so that you can kill the Legate and take it. And at that point, you're probably not going to be using it very much unless you're on PC, and then you can spawn it in which case then, yeah, it's a really, really strong weapon, but you don't get to use it very much. The Blade of the West is far more obtainable, and there's multiple of them. You just have to go to Lonesome Road and find a marked man that has one of these, kill him, and then take it off of him, or knock it out of his hand and then take it away from him. These ones do have very, very high requirements, having 100 melee weapons and 9 strength to wield, so they are one of the heftier weapons in the game. They do high damage per hit, they do good damage per second, they have an above average crit modifier, although the Blade of the West doesn't have as high crit damage for whatever reason. It also has the effect of knockdown on crits. They also have okay item health, and they do weigh a lot. They weigh 12, but you can cut that in half with heavyweight, which can be kind of useful, although it's not entirely necessary with melee weapon, because you're probably not going to be carrying around as much stuff, especially on like the hardcore difficulty with a melee build, as opposed to a dedicated guns or energy weapons build or something like that. Coming in number 6, we have the Thermic Lance. The Thermic Lance is another really strong melee weapon in Fallout. It's also very rare. You don't find these very often. There isn't really a whole lot of places to find them or enemies to have them, but you can buy them from the Brotherhood, which is pretty good. This does have a high stat requirement to use as well as a decent strength requirement. It does really high damage per hit, pretty high damage per second, has a 1x crit modifier with very low crit damage. This is one of the few weapons that can actually make pretty good use of like heavy-handed because you don't really need the extra crit damage. It's not bad to have on them, but it is one way that you can make use of that trait. This one also has the unique effect of ignoring damage resist and damage threshold on enemies, so it doesn't matter how much armor the enemy has, you're going to be doing very consistent damage to them, which makes this really strong. There is some downsides to this weapon, mainly that it weighs a lot and it's rare to get. This thing weighs 20, so even with heavyweight, this can be cut down to 10, which is still kind of hefty, but I mean, then it's a little bit more manageable. It does have a lot of item health, but this is basically an automatic weapon similar to like the Ripper. So just a Ripper but much longer range, and it does have a good action point attack, but the action point attack costs a lot of action points, so it may not be the best for a VATS build either. It's still going to be decent because all melee weapons are pretty good in a VATS build. And then coming in at number 5, we have the Chainsaw. The Chainsaw comes in 2 variants, the regular variant and the Gunrunner's Arsenal variant. You probably want the Gunrunner's Arsenal version, which you're just going to have to buy from merchants. So this one has a little bit lower requirements than something like the Thermic Lance, although it's very similar to the Thermic Lance in a lot of ways. It does very similar damage, so very high damage per second, has a 1x crit modifier with even lower crit damage, so again, heavy-handed can actually work pretty well on a dedicated like Chainsaw or Thermic Lance build, has a very high action point cost, but a pretty decent action point attack. It also ignores damage threshold and damage resistance too, so it's very consistent against all enemies, and it also weighs 20 just like the Thermic Lance, although it does have a little bit less item health, or more item health if you got mods on it. This one can have 3 mods, which help it out a lot. You can have the alloy frame, which drops its weight by 8, so then it goes down to 12, and if you had heavyweight, it drops it even further to 6. You can also have the carbide teeth, which give it more damage per hit, which is very good. And you can also get the heavy duty chain on it, which gives it 50% more item health, so it takes forever to break the chainsaw. Chainsaw is a little bit better than the Thermic Lance, I would say, at least once it's fully modded out. But both of them are very similar to one another, and both take advantage of very similar things. So I understand people wanting to switch one or the other. Whichever one is your favorite. I find the Chainsaw is a little bit easier to find, and it's easier to find the mods for it. Coming in at number 4, we have Knock Knock. Knock Knock is the unique fire axe, and it is a really fun weapon. It's probably one of my favorite looking weapons in general too. This one doesn't have too high requirements, although it does do really good damage per hit, very high damage per second, having an average crit modifier and having somewhat lowish crit damage compared to its regular damage, although it's still pretty decent. It also has low action point cost, it doesn't weigh very much, and it has decent item health. It also has a really good VATS attack with the Mauler, where it has just knockdown chance, or can just knock down enemies more consistently, which is always good. So all of those are really nice with Knock Knock. The only kind of downside to getting Knock Knock is actually finding it, because it is a little bit hidden in the game. You do have to go to Camp Searchlight and then either kill the raiders in the basement so that you can take the key off of them and then go to the fire station, or you have to do their quest up into the fire station, or if they die along the way to the fire station. That way you can actually get in there, and then Knock Knock is on the 2nd level inside of a bathroom stall. So it's kind of out of the way and it's kind of hidden, but it is a very solid melee weapon and I really enjoy using it. Coming in at number 3, we have Oh Baby. Oh Baby is the unique Super Sledge. This one you can find in a cave above Jacobstown, and it's just next to a dead Nightkin in the cave, so you can pick this up off of them, and it is a very, very strong weapon. It has really high strength requirements and skill requirements, as you would assume with a Super Sledge. Does really high damage per hit, very high damage per second, has an average crit modifier with kind of lowish crit damage, at least compared to its regular damage, but it's still pretty good. Has okay action point cost, does weigh a lot at 20, and has okay item health for a melee weapon. This one also has the Mauler special attack, so you can knock enemies down with it, which is really good. This one is just fantastic. It's really strong, and it's not very difficult to get. If you know where to go, you can run and get this very early on, and it will be a very solid melee weapon for you all throughout the game. Coming in at number 2, we have Chance's Knife. Chance's Knife is the unique combat knife. You can find this actually very early on. You can get this right at the very start if you would like to. This one doesn't have very high requirements whatsoever. It also has good damage per hit, very high damage per second, a 2x crit modifier with good crit damage. It has very low action point costs, and it also only weighs 1. This is probably one of the strongest early game weapons that you can get, if not the strongest early game weapon that you can get. Even on a non-melee character, this one is still really, really good. This is actually the very first weapon that can actually be snuck into areas where you can't carry weapons, and this one is a really strong weapon in those areas. In order to get this, you do need to have the shovel, but you can get that at the Good Springs water source, and then you just head back up the north way out of Good Springs, and then you have to head up the side of the hill. Once you go up there, you can find Chance's grave. There is some Cazadors along the way, so you might need to kill them. You can actually do this pretty easily at the start of Fallout New Vegas, though, if you repair the 9mm submachine gun in Doc's house. If you do that, then you go up there. You can usually kill the Cazadors without too much trouble. Just break their wings, and then you probably won't have to fight more than 2 or 3 of them, especially if you just hug the one side. That way you can just climb right up there and grab this, and this is a really good weapon, just in general. It's a really nice weapon to have. And then speaking of knives, my number 1 pick is Bloodknap. Bloodknap is the unique Bowie knife that you can find in the Lonesome Road. You do have to go to the Courier's Mile, which is considered the most dangerous area in the game, or one of the most dangerous areas in all of Fallout New Vegas. You don't have to go very far in, because this is actually stuck inside of a light post, like right as you go in, then you can take it out of there. This doesn't have high requirements similar to Chance's knife. It does very high damage per hit, extremely high damage per second, has a 1.5 times crit modifier, more crit damage than its regular damage, which is a little bit unique too. Has extremely low action point cost, so it's really good in a VATS build, and it also has the bonus of giving you 10 plus more sneak when you have it out. That's really good. It's also an improved holdout weapon, so you can sneak this into areas, and if Chance's knife was already crazy in those areas, this one is even more crazy than it. This one also only weighs 1, so it's extremely lightweight, and it has decent item health. Not great compared to some of the other melee weapons, but decent enough. And those would be my picks for the top 10 melee weapons. There still are a lot of other really good melee weapons, though, too, like the War Club didn't make it on here, but that one's a pretty good one. The antenna is a pretty decent one that you can get to. So there still is a lot more of these. Most melee weapons are actually pretty strong in New Vegas, but I would say that's mostly because like the perks make them so strong. If you get Super Slam, Slayer, Purifier, things like that, most melee weapons can take down most enemies, so long as you can get close enough to stab them or beat them to death with it. Tell me what your favorite melee weapons are down in the comments below. I'd love to hear them. Hope you guys enjoyed this, and I will talk to you guys next time. Bye-bye!